I'm Josh from Buttons Brewing. Welcome to the sunny northwest coast of Tasmania in Ulverston. We are doing a beer as part of the National Science Week and Science Made Beerable. So we decided to brew a blend between wine and beer for our beer this year. So what we've done is we've brewed a batch of a Pilsner base and then we've fermented that on wine grape skins. So that's sort of made a blend between beer and wine that's really complex and fruity, but also really quite smashable and drinkable. Today we're at the packaging stage, so we're putting the beer in cans and then labelling them and boxing them up. And we're having to do it all by hand with our single canning machine. And the reason behind that is because our usual mobile canners weren't comfortable with us putting this beer through their machine due to the wild aspect of it with wild bacteria and bits and pieces in it. The goal of canning is to fill it with a liquid, trying to get as minimal amount of oxygen as possible, because oxygen just leads to not only oxidation of the product, but it can result in aerobic bacteria growing and spoiling the product. So what we do is we get our can, we purge it with CO2. Once the carbon dioxide is purged into the can, it sinks to the bottom of the can because it's heavier than oxygen. Then when you add the liquid to the bottom of the can, it will, as that goes up, it will displace the oxygen and the carbon dioxide will stay as a blanket across the top of the liquid. Then put the lid on the can and use our canning machine, which basically bends the lip of the can over and then seals it. And then, put the label on around the edge. And then that's pretty much it, because the product's already carbonated in the tank, so we don't need to do any can carbonating. Conditioning is a phase of the fermentation process where most of the sugars have been converted by the yeast into alcohol and carbon dioxide. So that conditioning phase is quite often settling out of a lot of bits and pieces. It's the yeast cleaning up a lot of the bits and pieces, the off flavours, just to get a nice clean beer at the end of the process. Conditioning in stainless, you're going to get a really good, stable, clean flavour, especially things like lagers and pilsners. For this beer, we conditioned a little bit in the stainless, but then transferred to oak barrels. So we probably did most of our conditioning in the oak barrels. So for us, the process of being in the oak not only mellowed out some of those tannins that we extracted from the wine skins, but it also just resulted in the yeast cleaning up any unwanted compounds that might have been in there. We got these ones from Ghost Rock, which is where we got the grape skins from. If you stop a fermentation too soon without that conditioning phase, it can result in off flavours being left in the beer, but it can also result in not having the correct final gravity, which can result in cans exploding. Off flavours like diacetyl, they're just compounds that are produced by the yeast, and they can be produced by the grain in the mash. We typically just use taste to know when it's ready. But conditioning can be anything from days to weeks to months, depends on what your end goal is. As a rule of thumb, when the final gravity is where it needs to be, the beer's ready to drink, but depends what goal you want. If you want to really age the beer, then it can take weeks or months. So the hoppy beers you want to consume as fresh as possible, whereas the beers that age really well are things, typically ones that use a lot of sort of roasted malts, higher alcohol, or even ones that are in barrels to pick up those extra complex flavours. This batch we did a Pilsner base wort and fermented it on Pinot Noir skins, and then we did a separate batch where we did the exact same thing on Pinot Gris skins. And we initially were going to release them as two separate beers, as a Pinot Noir and a Pinot Gris. But we actually thought that the Pinot Noir, like I mentioned before, was just too short on the palate, just stopped. So that's when we blended those two together. So blending adds complexity. If you think that beer just doesn't have enough layers to it, blending can lead to a better final product that way.